And so I'm going to be moderator, but I'm going to throw a couple of perspectives in on behalf of the United States to give you a global picture here. And I'm going to begin with that because I think it's indicative of where we are now with advancing the startup movements around the world. And that is that we're taking a much more scientific and systematic approach to understanding which interventions help and which do not to support startups. So just so we're clear here, there's been a lot of confusion. We heard Startup Chile, which is ostensibly around importing entrepreneurs. We've also heard about Startup America. Now, Startup America has primarily been around bringing large companies to help entrepreneurs and been around seeding the creation of grassroots-driven or bottom-up startup communities around the United States. But there were many aspects of the Startup America movement which have not been successful and some that have been successful. And in fact, at the Kauffman Foundation, as a lead player in that movement, we will be going to phase 2 with Startup America this year, which will, in a way, rebuild what that movement is. And one of the lessons that we've learned is that you can't really, to some degree, can you really make it a national movement? Or should it be done in cities, as our panel proposed this morning, or even in smaller communities? Is that the way we should be building our startup culture and support? So I'll start with that question. And if I can, I'll start with Bowen on the end here. Tell us a little bit about what you learned in India, about whether or not the geography matters in terms of, is it small boroughs of cities, is it regions, is it states? But give us a sense of what you learned with your report and if there's something we can learn for that.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on stage today. So about India, I spent about 3 weeks in India talking with about close to 1,000 entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, trying to understand what's happening in India. And what I found was that although the country is about 1.2 billion people population, it's about to overtake China in the next few years, the startup community is actually very, very small. About 50% of the startup actually come from a single city called Bangalore. That's the Silicon Valley of startup. And there's a few more startup ecosystems sprinkled in the next 10 big cities in India. And in comparison to some of the other ecosystems, you can say this ecosystem probably started about 3 to 5 years ago. And it's still a very, very young ecosystem, despite it being such a big country.
Okay. Is there one thing that you learned in India that struck you from talking to these entrepreneurs that was an intervention that has really made a big difference, high impact, value?
What do you mean interventions?
Well, by intervention, I mean either a program or support that's come from an organization or a movement.
So not so much from the organization, but they did get a lot of impact from the government. So there's a very famous quote in India. It goes something like this. In China, startups happen because of the government. In India, startups happen in spite of the government.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things the government is not doing, but it's okay, because if the program is truly run by the government, the program is probably not going to be too successful. So India is really following what Brad Feld has said. It is truly an entrepreneur-led ecosystem. And that is one thing that's very promising. And those people are going through all these problems. If they don't have the roads, if they don't have a mailing system, they build their own. Like the one in the company called Flipkart. Right now, it's about $800 million company. And some of the other issues that they're facing the challenge, these startups are actually overcoming it, despite not having the support from the organizations and the government.
Okay, great. So Felipe, is the startup movement here in Brazil alive and well? Tell us more from where you are.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me here as well. It's a pleasure. And I would say that the startup movement in Brazil has gained a lot of traction in the last 3 years, especially in the last 2 years. Just to give a sense of that, if you look at the number of accelerators, for instance, in the country we had 2-3 years ago, and we have more than 30 now. So it's really happening. And we've seen a community building going on as well. So what I would say is that Brazil is one of probably the hottest markets now among the emerging economies. We've had a very good economic momentum in the past couple of days, and it has also attracted capital. So lots of startups coming in, not only Brazilian, but international startups coming in as well. And this is creating a very vibrant ecosystem. And we've seen initiatives such as Startup Weekend, and the government playing a good role as well. We're just going to launch Startup-Brasil, which is a program made by the government that I'm running now, to fund and attract new startups in the country. So, yeah, I'm really excited about this moment. Actually, it's been a pretty good momentum for the Brazilian startup ecosystem.
Well, we're very excited that Startup-Brasil will be born, it appears, around the time of the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. So.
Yeah. Well, the launching event is going to be this Thursday here at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, and I invite you all to come in this Thursday and watch out.
Wonderful. Antonius, so we know that Mr. Saputra was like Mr. Kaufman. He created the foundation. He thought entrepreneurship education was important. I know you're in all the schools. But give us a sense, I mean, is this converting into a startup movement? Is the startup culture alive and well in Indonesia? And are you seeing the same emergence of accelerators and incubators and so forth? Talk us a little bit about life.
Thank you very much for staying and listening. I work for Ciputra Foundation. Ciputra is a prominent entrepreneur in Indonesia. He is 82 years old now, and he believes entrepreneurship will change the future of our nation. So he promotes heavily entrepreneurship, and things happen. However, 6 years ago, if you went to Indonesia, not so many people discussing or talking about entrepreneurship or startup, but 2009, something happened. I would like to share to you how a down-top initiative creates a top-down impact. In 2009, October, Mr. Ciputra sent a letter to our president about the importance of entrepreneurship for the future of our country. He is very smart. He understands if he just only him signing the letter, maybe the letter is not so impactful. So he asked one of his friends, owner of the biggest media in my country, to sign the letter together. You know what happened? If the president of the country receiving a letter from the one who owns the biggest media, certainly he will read the letter. And a day after he received a letter, there is a national summit. The president speaks in front of 1,000 Indonesian leaders. And at the time, he said to the people that he received a letter about entrepreneurship education, and he agreed it is something important for the future of the company. You know, after that, the very short time, many ministries in our government taking entrepreneurship is part of their program. And in this short time, it becoming an issue in education. And after that, more people know about entrepreneurship, more startup among the students, and also university, private sector doing something on entrepreneurship. And things going better now. However, we believe having a good environment of startup, we have to start first with inspiration, and then education, and thirdly, incubation. Yeah, I think in terms of inspiration, we have done it in Indonesia. Educating, I think we still struggle about that. We have 240 million people. It's not easy to educate them. And on incubating, we still learn about that. Also, we learn from Global Entrepreneurship Program and some other people who has experience in the US and some other countries. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to keep moving around the world here for a minute, and then we'll come back to a discussion. But Tuba, tell us a little bit. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You know, your nation has a reputation for having a very strong economy. How strong is the startup community?
Thank you, Jonathan, for that question. Actually, one of the downsides that we have is the world perceives us as very rich. Nobody wants to give capital or bring venture capital houses to Saudi. They think that Saudi should invest outside. What we found out in the past several years working with the government agencies is using money wisely is a talent that they need to learn as a government, and entrepreneurs need to speak up for what they need. And bridging that gap is why Kutuf happened. Basically, a lot of cash and effort has been spent by Saudi Arabia trying to form what they believe is the right approach. But they were not listening to the entrepreneurs as much as they should. So our task was basically to tell them, well, guys, this is where the entrepreneurs are, and this is what they really need. Are you going to be willing to support them with what they need? That's a turnaround that they're not used to, knowing that Saudi Arabia is primarily a family-run business in itself as a monarch, and we have a very loving king, so he listens to his people. We were very lucky, like our president, we were able to reach the ears of most of our ministers. They allied, which is very rare, and they started 36 initiatives countrywide, each one with different recipes for different parts of the country, and Kutuf is a project management for most of those initiatives. What we're finding very difficult to do, though, is to convince entrepreneurs to seek supporting each other and supporting the initiatives that we have. They want to be left alone. They actually don't want any intervention, which is absolutely normal. That's what an entrepreneur's nature is. But because they don't speak up, and because they don't act as role models, because they don't act as business coaches to the up-and-coming generations, there is no next wave of entrepreneurs that are easily produced. And we're trying to get the entrepreneurs to speak up and to give to other entrepreneurs. For instance, we don't have angel investment networks. Today with me are two of the gentlemen from Saudi Arabia that flew over. They founded the first angel investors network. We don't have venture capital houses except for two. We don't have bankruptcy laws. So a lot of the good things that we really need, we actually don't have. And now at least we're admitting that we don't have them or looking around. So to give you a perspective of our turnaround, 2 years ago, the people that were representing us at GEC were government entities. Now we're 2 entrepreneurs and 2 semi-government entities. So definitely the private enterprises are getting into what we call the corporate entrepreneurship responsibility. We're a very giving nation. We like to give away money, but that's not what the entrepreneurs need. They really literally need to dialogue and talk to each other a lot more. So we're doing that. Thanks.
That's great. And I know I had the great privilege of participating in your GW board meeting. And I know that this dialogue question was important because someone explained to me at that meeting, in our culture, we have a very tribal culture and we often don't tell each other things. And I was shocked when we got everyone around the table. I could not believe how much people didn't know about what everybody else was doing. I also want to congratulate you because you had a good mix between men and women around the table. So we were very happy to see that too.
Thank you.
Well, that's wonderful. So Dash, we'll let you weigh in. Okay, Malaysia, you're near Singapore, which has always had a reputation for understanding the startup world. How are things? Are they on the rise? Are they leveled out? How are things going in the Malaysian startup ecosystem?
So thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me in the panel. I actually got involved in the entrepreneurship or startup world thanks to GW, because in 2008 I became the Malaysian host for global entrepreneurship. So I used it as an opportunity to actually go around to the ground and actually travel the entire country to understand how entrepreneurship is growing or not growing in some parts of the country, how young people are embracing entrepreneurship. And at that time, not many people understood the idea what a startup was. To them, a startup was like a small business. So this was an education to me as well, because what I found was marginally successful entrepreneurs have a very specific way of succeeding. And the ones who are failing for the same reasons as well. So, in fact, I personally wanted to understand the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and I had a lot of knowledge gaps myself. And at that time, Cambridge University came up with a program on postgraduate on entrepreneurship, and I said, since I need to close my gap, I should go and learn myself. And there I learned quite a lot about startups, entrepreneurship. I mean, a lot of people may say, how do you learn entrepreneurship in a university? But this is a program for entrepreneurs. And that inspired me to come up with Startup Malaysia. So the vision of Startup Malaysia is basically to create or increase the number of fundable startups by bringing the best practices, the best learning from ecosystems like the Silicon Valley to Malaysia. The government all governments tries to build Silicon Valley. But what we are trying to do is to learn from Silicon Valley, don't try to be Silicon Valley, but build the best practices, the best things possible. So Startup Malaysia exists to create, increase the number of fundable startups. The way we do it is that we break the ecosystem, or divide the ecosystem into 3 parts. One is called mining for gold, and the middle is making jewelry, and the third part is to sell the jewelry. In mining for gold, we do programs in schools and universities to sensitize young people to entrepreneurship. So the other one thing we are going to do now is we are going to train 10,000 kids on how to code. If you do not know how to code, how do you create high-growth entrepreneurs? So that's one of the things we're going to do with Code Academy from the US in partnership. In the middle, where we say making jewelry, is we organize programs like the Startup Weekend to get people to understand startups, and the idea of customer validation and all that very quickly. And we scaled Startup Weekend we had a lot of Startup Weekend events in Malaysia. In the selling jewelries, that we want to select the real good entrepreneurs and connect them to ecosystems like the Silicon Valley. So we did a big program called Silicon Valley Come to Malaysia last year. I don't know whether my co-founder is here. Her name is Rebecca of Startup Malaysia. So Rebecca. We worked in partnership with her to bring a group of young entrepreneurs to Silicon Valley. So we basically had a competition for 1,000 entrepreneurs. We selected 100 of them, and then from the 100 we took 10, but we actually only could get 5 to take them to Silicon Valley. So, and these guys have come back from the learnings from Silicon Valley and are sharing it with other people. So to now answer your question between Singapore and Malaysia, well, I think Singapore does a lot of entrepreneurship work, but I think they're very good at marketing it. Malaysia needs to learn how to make more noise. So there's a lot of entrepreneurship activity happening in Malaysia. In Global Entrepreneurship Week alone, we did 300 activities throughout the year, but not during the week that many. Yeah.
Great. Let me ask you, and Bowie, I'm going to come back to you because you're obviously working with this World Startup Report. What should all of us as nations be? What matters as we assess the health of our startup ecosystems in these countries? What should we all be looking for? I know there's no one size that fits all in all countries, but the startup communities are, relative to other issues around the world, there does seem to be a lot of similarities in culture, in the methodologies of actually co-founder dating, going through the iterative process of forming an idea and creating a company and taking it to scale. I mean, these are phenomenally global concepts. So when we look at the health of our ecosystem to accelerate that, what are the primary things that something like the World Startup Report or the Startup Genome Report or things like this should be looking at to say, you know, these are the 2 or 3 things that we should measure across countries?
So first of all, there's a common misconception that we have to compare and follow the footsteps of Silicon Valley. And I believe that is completely false because Silicon Valley has a history of 50 plus years. And if you were to follow their footsteps, it's going to be a long way before you become successful.
Let me interrupt you there. So let's have everybody in the audience, if I could, because this comes up a lot, and I'm glad you brought it up. How many of you think that it's really important that you all go to Silicon Valley and try to use that as your model? Who's still focused on that model? You may be shy, there's a lot of you, but I actually want to make a point because I think there's actually, fortunately, more and more people who are understanding that, you know, that is a misconception. So I think that's something we can accomplish on this panel to have actually, you know, laid the gauntlet on it.
I mean, like, if you look at TechCrunch, which everybody looks at, all the Silicon Valley, all of the innovation comes from Silicon Valley, and it's not true. And there are different ways you can build an ecosystem, and there are different ways to succeed. And I didn't realize that until I actually went to China, this like about a year and a half ago, and it absolutely blew me away. I just want to give you some really quick number to tell you like how you can not be Silicon Valley and still be successful. So there's like a small little company called Taobao. It's like a little like a eBay or Amazon clone, you can call it. But they do some very interesting things. They do cash on delivery. They do like some really other things that fit the Chinese culture very well. And right now, I think about a few months ago, they did a sale for 24 hours. And in this 24 hours, this company sold about 3.5 billion US dollars of goods. Billion. And after 11 months of operation, this company has crossed 1 trillion RMB in sales. In case you don't know how much RMB is, it's 1 to 6. So this company is doing roughly about 2% of China's GDP. So you can have a very successful company and not completely not following the Silicon Valley model. You can do your own things. So if you push the Silicon Valley like metrics aside, what you are left with is actually some very basic fundamentals of, I would say, pillars of startup ecosystem. And I fall back on Brad Feld's research on this. He identified 4 pillars of the startup ecosystem. Number 1, the startup community has to be entrepreneurs-led. It cannot be the government. It cannot be the schools. It cannot be the investors. It has to be by the entrepreneurs for the entrepreneurs. The second pillar of a good startup community is it has to have very long-term vision. And I'm not talking about 5 years, 10 years. He said at least 20 years. Because if you don't have a long-term vision and you don't have the right incentive, then you cannot build a good ecosystem. The third is that you have to have activities that is on all level of the startup spectrum. You have to have the startup weekends that teach people how to do startup. You have to have the like hackathons that like actually produce good, better work. You have to have the in-depth like discussions about how things are actually working in different like Ruby on Rails and like like Python. And the last pillar of the startup ecosystem is that you have to be inclusive of others. You cannot be by yourself. You have to really allow other people to come into your ecosystem, help others, and have them help other people as well. Build this pay-it-forward mentality. And these are the most basic pillar of a good startup ecosystem. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that does. And maybe we'll use that as a benchmark to maybe ask each of you. So in Brazil, of those 4 things, is there something in particular that you think you're getting right or wrong?
Yeah, I think so. And I would add to that. I used to say that we have 3 main things, and these 4 are included in that one. So 1, we need good people. That means good education. And by education, I don't mean formal education or the education, or the academic education, but also entrepreneurial education. And well, from my perspective, the formal university or the formal academy cannot teach how to be an entrepreneur. It's about having good experiences and practical stuff. Secondly, we need funds. And what we've seen in Brazil, and I've been an entrepreneur myself since I was 16 years old, and I've tried to start businesses and startups here. And what happened in the last couple of years was that there was no capital. If you were an entrepreneur, you wanted to start a startup, we had no angel investors. Bank is not an option, so or you're wealthy and you have family and friends, or you just can't start a business. So funding, and especially funding in the very early stage, is really important. And this is something that is going on and growing a lot in Brazil in the last couple of years. And the third is having a community. And I would say that inside the community, those four pillars, they fit in. And it has to be driven by entrepreneurs. I do agree with you. And we've seen in Brazil in the last years lots of initiatives that has been led by entrepreneurs. We're trying to, they are the ones who are coming to government and to companies and demanding attention, funds. So I really believe in that entrepreneur-driven community building. And also, I would say that getting connected, and this is something that we see in the Valley, and again, I don't think that we have to, you can emulate Silicon Valley, it's different context. But one of the things that I think the Valley has, and all the ecosystem that work they do have, is connections among people, and people helping each other and getting connected. And this is something that I think it has a lot to do with the Brazilian culture as well. We are really social and we like to engage with each other in Brazil. And this is, I would say that the Y generation that's young and connected is pushing this connectivity and the networking to the next level. And that this is going to lead us into a much more vibrant ecosystem, I would say. I feel that I've been here, seen lots of startup people from all over the world, and saying the same terms and thinking about how to create ecosystems. And I've had the opportunity to be in different countries, and it's like the same discussions, same problems, maybe different contexts. And what I see is it's really about getting people involved. And the entrepreneurship is not just about making money, but also bringing impact into the world. Yep. So that's what really matters, right?
And Tony, so I'm going to pick out one of those things that was mentioned, because I know the Saputra Foundation is known for your work in entrepreneurship education. What is one of your latest insights into how to do this or how not to do this in the context of educating entrepreneurs? I know we had a great panel on experiential education this afternoon. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Ciputra Foundation, we develop education from the kindergarten until to university. 6 years ago, we opened one university dedicated with the theme entrepreneurship. It means every student from any subject or any faculty, they have to learn entrepreneurship. Every Wednesday, all children gathering together, just learning about entrepreneurship. It means experiential learning. However, how to inspire young children in the kindergarten? I think we have a lot of things we can do. Of course, in the level of very young kindergarten, we cannot do really experiential learning as what we do to the university children. But we can bring them to the experience and inspiration. Anyhow, they will know this is the job of entrepreneur. And then after they go to the elementary, they can learn more. And usually in the high school, we can do like a small bazaar, we can do like entrepreneurship day, and they will learn more. And we try to structure the experience from inspiration to experiment from kindergarten to the high school and to the university level.
Okay, that's great. Well, Tuba, as you try to mature the ecosystem in Saudi Arabia, is there something in particular that you are learning from, if not Silicon Valley, your experience by visiting and learning from other ecosystems? What's the biggest thing that another startup ecosystem could help you with?
one thing that I love reading is if Dr. Daniel Eisenberg is out here, his BEAP program and its pillars. And yesterday he was mentioning the number one thing that people need to do is dialogue, and number two is reputation. And in my part of the world, dialogue is most often than not polite. People don't tell you anything negative to your face, and they shy away from telling you what's right because, everybody's right is their own right. And they don't want to show you the way because they're afraid that you're going to tell them it's none of your business. And when you came to our GEW meeting and the GEW board, we formed telling everyone now is an objective entity from outside of Saudi Arabia who doesn't know any one of you. Our chairman, Jonathan Orthmans, is going to fly in, and you can share with him freely, not necessarily with each other, what your needs are and what you could do amongst each other to improve the ecosystem, where you leverage your budgets, you gain more impact for your programs, and at least you unify your efforts. And it's worked wonders for us. We had very shy people, and they didn't want to talk to each other from the first day get-go, and it's taken us a whole year, and they're now starting to talk to each other. And hopefully GEW 2014 and 2013 are going to be much better. But on another level is the entrepreneurs talking to each other. We can't get them to talk to each other because we have no IP protection in Saudi. There's no court where you can go sue the guy that just stole your idea in a cafe. And that limits the entrepreneurs talking to each other, and that's something we're trying to work around. The point of reputation, and here it is where it really gets funny, we are so negative on what is an entrepreneur. Like the Americans, we haven't found a proper word for the French word, and it's not in our textbooks, it's not in our schools. We call them businessmen or tradesmen or, business leaders. But an entrepreneur is in our perception and definition is someone who's crazy, is self-centric because they want to pursue their own dream, and they don't care if they flunk their whole family along the way. So with that in mind, nobody wants to give their daughters to an entrepreneur, so you'll find an entrepreneur always is a single guy in his 40s. And he's the only guy with the gray in the room because everybody has turned him down as a crazy guy. Now, my parents did the traditional thing and married me off to a civil engineer, top of his class from Queen Mary's in UK, a Saudi who came back home to change the country. And they found out he was physically crazy. After 10 years, I divorced him and told him I'm going to be the entrepreneur. So that was a changing point in my family. And I've been talking about it ever since in schools, colleges. We started mentorship programs, and we've done a lot. But again, everybody assumes I'm half crazy. I fear for my daughters not being able to get married in the future as well. So, so those are the two things that we have in our ecosystem we need to fix.
It's so wonderful because you wouldn't think that dialogue is great. Now, we want to know that it's entrepreneurs that have helped you have dialogue with us about that. So Dash, I'm going to ask for the final observation for you, and then we're going to go down there if you all want to add one last quick thing, because we've only got a minute left. Dash, I know you're looking for help, but you're actually bringing the world to Kuala Lumpur, is that right? Tell us a little bit more about the Global Entrepreneurship Summit.
Okay. First about the ecosystem. I think one of the important things in the ecosystem, especially the emerging countries, from Malaysia at least perspective, is to build trust. Trust among, like Brad Fell says, the feeders. When you bring in the feeders like government, private sector, venture, the successful people, is how do you educate them to build trust? I think that's very, very crucial. And also there is no one is a boss in the room. In the ecosystem, no one actually holds all the power. It's all about the network. So that's very important. Very important. I would like to take the opportunity to tell about the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. Malaysia will be hosting it in October. It's a summit that will be hosted by the Malaysian government with the entrepreneurs. And we hope the highest person from the White House would be there. And I think we'll work with partnership with Global Entrepreneurship Week to bring everyone. And one more thing that I would like to say is that we want to, the host of Global Entrepreneurship to send at least 2 youth from your country to Malaysia before the summit, just 2 days before the summit. We want to bring about 500 to 800 youth from around the world to do a startup weekend so the youth can really connect with each other. So this is something Startup Malaysia will be hosting. We don't have the money to host it yet, but like all entrepreneurial ventures, we throw the idea out and then we'll try to make it happen. Thanks.
Wonderful. Great. All right. So before we wrap up this panel, I want to ask you if you'll stay in your seats for our last interview. I want to remind you that what we did here today is we tried to say, look, here's Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, here's someone that understands India, and obviously Brazil and Indonesia. But I think you saw up here the last day and a half representatives who understand what's happening in all these countries. And for those of you that don't already plan it, know that throughout the next 2 days, we will have multiple events, which are all in your booklet, for you to participate in. And you'll have a choice of everything from angel investing to learning about the programs that are available to you. But I also want to remind you, separate to those programs, that on Thursday night, there is an event at the top of the Sugarloaf for which you are all welcome. It'll be 5 hours long. It'll be the chance for you to find the person from any country. And I want to thank my team, who worked quite hard to make sure that all of your names were in this book, even though many of you only registered a couple of days before. And they did that because they wanted you to look at it and say, I'm really interested in having a relationship with the people in Bhutan who are working on entrepreneurship. So some of you already know that you're coming and joining us on Thursday night, but I've been asked by the organizers to say, I'm afraid it's not a free party for everybody. But if you do want to check to see if you're coming, or if you want to get yourself there, I've been asked to remind everybody there is a place downstairs where you can get your ticket for Thursday night. It's going to be phenomenal. And we are assured by the governor that the sun will come out. Okay. Before we join in a final thank you to all the panel for being up here, as I say, please stay here. This is the last thing we're doing today. And then after that, we want to encourage you on your way to drink and be merry and merge your ecosystems for a better tomorrow. So please join me in a thank you to our panel.